Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into some of the most deeply analyzed texts in human history, the Gospels. But we're not just doing a standard history read-through today. Instead, we're going to synthesize these ancient narratives to uncover this absolutely brilliant thematic through line. We'll be looking at how the original writers structured their accounts to present a figure who is literally operating in two completely different spheres at the exact same time. It's a masterclass in literary and dialogical structuring, and we're going to see these familiar sources in a totally fresh light. So here's the massive question guiding our entire journey today. How exactly do ancient texts capture a figure who is both entirely divine and deeply human? Think about how insanely hard that is for a writer to pull off. If you lean too far into the cosmic, well, the subject loses all relatable humanity. But if you lean too far into the human frailty, that supreme authority totally evaporates. Matthew, Luke, and John navigate this tension so perfectly. We're going to trace this dual nature narrative chronologically, step by step, just to see exactly how they nailed this extraordinary balancing act. Part 1. The Origins, Sweeping Lineage and Humble Birth. Okay, let's dive right into the very beginning of the story. And by beginning, I don't just mean a baby being born. I mean panning all the way back across generations. The Gospel of Matthew actually kicks off with this massive, sweeping genealogy. It deliberately traces a line through three absolutely critical eras, starting with Abraham, the generation of promise, down to King David, establishing that crucial royal line, and right through the Babylonian exile, which was this agonizing period of waiting. Matthew uses these three eras to basically mathematically and theologically prove Jesus' messianic credentials to his first-century Jewish audience. Right out of the gate, it signals that this arrival is the ultimate climax of ancient prophecy. Now, what's really fascinating here is the stark juxtaposition between Matthew's high cosmic view and Luke's incredibly grounded narrative. Matthew gives us total royalty and divine drama. We've got a mysterious star, Eastern wise men carrying treasures, a terrified King Herod, and this dramatic midnight flight to Egypt to escape a massacre. Honestly, it reads like a royal thriller. But Luke grounds everything in gritty, bureaucratic reality. The whole thing is tied to a Roman census. The birth happens in a feeding trough because there's literally no room anywhere else. And the VIP audience, not kings, but local shepherds working the night shift. It's the ultimate contrast, cosmic importance colliding with absolute human obscurity. But, even within Luke's incredibly humble, grounded setting, the text is constantly elevated. Specifically, the writer weaves in these four absolutely stunning songs of praise, the famous canticles. We get Mary's song, the Magnificat, praising God for totally flipping worldly expectations upside down. There's Zechariah's prophecy, the Benedictus. Then, out of nowhere, angels belting out the Gloria in Excelsis to those stunned shepherds. And finally, you have Simeon's beautiful song of peace, the Nunc Dimittis. These songs act like soaring divine interruptions right in the middle of a very gritty, historically grounded story. Part 2. The Awakening, 12 years old in the temple. All right, let's jump the timeline forward 12 years to the only biblical account we actually have of Jesus' childhood. And the dramatic tension here is just masterful. So after the annual Passover trip to Jerusalem, Mary and Joseph are heading home in a massive caravan. They naturally assume their son is hanging out with relatives, but a full day later they realize he's totally missing. What follows is a frantic, agonizing 3-day search. The text brilliantly contrasts this totally relatable, sheer human panic of earthly parents with what they eventually find. They finally spot their 12-year-old boy sitting calmly in the temple courts. He's not crying, he's not scared, he's just deeply engaged in profound theological debate with the top religious scholars. When an exhausted, probably terrified Mary asks how he could do this to them, his response is wild. These are actually the very first recorded words of Jesus in the texts. "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" It's gentle, sure, but it is an incredibly firm anchor point. For the very first time, he's openly identifying God as his true father, firmly elevating his heavenly, divine mission way above his earthly family ties. And this beautifully illustrates the exact balance we've been tracking. On one hand, he declares this major divine identity. He has vast wisdom and claims God as his literal father. But, and this is key, he doesn't just walk off into the desert right then to become some untouchable cosmic guru. No, the text explicitly tells us he went back to Nazareth with Mary and Joseph, and he was completely obedient to them. He modeled perfect humanity. He grew up, he learned, and he stayed completely submissive to his earthly parents. He held the divine calling and the everyday human duty perfectly together. Part 3. The Climax, Ultimate Power and Human Tears. Now we move into his adult, public ministry in the Gospel of John, and the contrast reaches this incredible emotional peak. Jesus gets word that his really close friend, Lazarus, is gravely ill. But get this, Jesus intentionally delays. He just stays where he is for 2 whole days. By the time he finally rolls into Bethany, Lazarus isn't just sick, and he hasn't just passed away. He's been dead and sealed in a stone burial cave for 4 full days. The suspense, the raw grief in the text here is just palpable. It all builds up to this massive crescendo right before Jesus shouts into that tomb, "Lazarus, come out." But right before that mind-blowing miracle, Jesus has this profound conversation with Lazarus' grieving sister, Martha. He looks at her and says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die." Think about that for a second. That is not just some nice, comforting platitude to say at a funeral. That is a declaration of absolute cosmic authority. He is claiming ultimate divine power over the absolute boundary of life and death itself. Yet right next to that sweeping, universal claim, the text gives us this. 2 words: Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the entire Bible. Let the gravity of that sink in. The exact same man who just confidently claimed ultimate power over death, who literally knows he is seconds away from bringing his best friend back to life, is still so deeply moved by the sorrow of the crowd and the sister's grief that he openly breaks down crying. It is arguably the most poignant, raw display of human empathy in the whole narrative, and it's paired right next to his absolute greatest display of divine power. This specific event is actually defined in the texts as the climax of signs. Raising Lazarus is the absolute peak miracle in John's Gospel. But it was a huge double-edged sword. On one hand, it showcased incredible divine glory and sparked massive belief among the people, but functionally, it sealed his fate. The religious authorities saw this undeniable, terrifying power. They completely panicked, and they actively set their deadly plots into motion. Part 4. Final duty at the cross. And that plot succeeds, which brings us to the agonizing final chronological point, in John 19, the crucifixion. Standing right there near the cross are a few of his faithful followers, including his mother, Mary, and his closest friend, John. Now, in the middle of this completely unimaginable physical agony, Jesus looks down at them and speaks. He says to Mary, "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother." It's this intensely quiet, intimate moment happening right in the middle of a brutal, very public execution. So the crucial takeaway here is how brilliantly this brief interaction functions on 2 completely different levels. On a grounded, highly practical level, Jesus is fulfilling his cultural duty. As the eldest son, he's making sure his widowed mother is provided for. Since his biological brothers weren't believers yet and weren't even there, he secures her a home by entrusting her to his best friend. But at the exact same time, on a massive theological level, tradition has long viewed this as Jesus establishing Mary as the spiritual mother to all believers, with John representing the faithful church. Even while literally dying, he is managing the everyday reality of a human son while spiritually organizing a divine family. It's incredible. The ultimate synthesis. Wow, we have really journeyed through an incredible textual landscape today. Think about it. We started with sweeping ancient genealogies mapping out royal bloodlines, only to find the newborn king resting in a feeding trough. We watched a 12-year-old totally submit to his earthly parents while boldly claiming his heavenly father. We saw a man sob over a friend's grave right before commanding the dead to rise. And finally, we witnessed a dying son securing a home for his mother while simultaneously forming a spiritual church. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. How does holding ultimate cosmic authority and intimate human vulnerability perfectly together completely reshape how we understand this story? Because it's not just a clever literary trick, it's the very engine that makes these texts so enduringly powerful. It means the divine isn't some distant, untouchable concept, and the human isn't insignificant. It's all connected. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.